Hey everyone, Tankenstein here. In this video, I'll be reviewing the Assault Tank T14. This is a currently ranked 3 battle rating 4.7 heavy tank in the American Ground Forces tech tree, and currently costs 1,750 Golden Eagles, and comes with 10 backups. In this review, I'll be going over everything that you need to know about it, including its stats, how it plays, I'll go over its strengths and weaknesses, I'll give some scores in several key areas, and then I'll give my final recommendation, and if I feel this vehicle is worth purchasing or not. As always, please consider subscribing if you'd like more content like this, as I always greatly appreciate it. But with that said, let's get into the review. Now to start, I'll place its stat card here on the side of the screen. Important things to note are its reload rate, its power to weight ratio, and its armor. Now for how it plays. The T14 is essentially like a proto-jumbo Sherman, at least in a way. It has less armor, but also sits at a lower BR, and can be played fairly similarly. What this means is that the T14 can be played as a frontline tank due to its heavy armor, but can also be used as a support vehicle as well. Unfortunately, however, though it isn't slow, the T14 is by no means a quick tank, and is typically going to be forced to play in roles that don't drift too far from the front lines, meaning that flanking and base capping are delicacies while playing this tank. Regardless, the 75mm cannon is still sufficient in this role, especially if you know enemy weak spots, as it has just enough armor pen to be able to punch through most tanks frontally at and below its BR, and still be dangerous to enemies while in the occasional up tier. This decent enough power when combined with its good reload makes the T14 fairly formidable, especially as a brawler, as it can take hits and deal them back to the enemy at a rate faster than most tanks can do. It isn't amazing, but the cannon will get the job done, and even has fairly effective APCR shells for use in an emergency. But with that said, the T14 is essentially going to be a good brawler and frontline tank, at least in down tiers, though can be a useful support tank through pretty much its entire BR range. I would avoid things like sniping due to its mediocre power at longer ranges, plus its meh gunner's optics, and also of course flanking and base capping due to its weight and mobility. Now with that being said, let's get into its strengths and weaknesses. And first, for its strengths. While the stat card doesn't make it look like a lot, the overall armor on the T14 is quite good, especially when angled, and doubly so when at a distance from the enemy. Second, this features smoke grenades. For its third strength, in my experience, the T14 sees down tiers fairly commonly. Fourth, it has a top-mounted HMG that helps to damage or destroy lightly armored vehicles and aircraft. For its fifth strength, it has a good turret traverse rate that can be as high as 24 degrees per second with an aced crew. Sixth, it features good vertical guidance of between -10 and +24 degrees for the cannon. For its seventh strength, has a very good reload rate that can be as low as 5 seconds. For its 8th strength, this has surprisingly thick side armor that is over 100mm in some areas, but is largely over 75mm nearly everywhere else. For its 9th strength, the T14 features a cannon stabilizer that works to around 22 km per hour, which helps tremendously while firing on the move. And finally, the T14 features RP and SL bonuses. Now for its weaknesses. Though it can still work, that 75mm cannon on the T14 has a difficult time penning at this BR, especially on heavy tanks and more so in up tiers. Knowledge of enemy weak spots is essentially required when using this vehicle. Second, while not outright slow, the T14 is sluggish in terms of overall mobility. For its third weakness, the T14 features a hull MG port that is fairly large and is easy to target, though at least it still has somewhat decent armor considering it's a weak spot. For its fourth weakness, this is a fairly tall tank, which means that this is an easy vehicle to spot and thus to target. And finally, this has very wide tracks that can make it very easy to immobilize the T14. Now with all that said, let's get into how I score this vehicle. And first, for armament, I give it a 5.75 out of 10. Initially, I was going to give this a 5.5, but I'm giving it the benefit of the doubt. Some people might give the T14 a 6 or above in this category, while others might give it below a 5, and everyone's got their reasons. Personally, I think that the M3 75mm cannon is still effective at this BR, so long as you know enemy weak spots. It still has over 100mm millimeters of armor pen at max with its M61 APC-BC shell, of which has a decent amount of explosive filler that greatly aids in post-pen damage. Plus, it has a great reload rate and access to APCR with nearly 140 millimeters of armor pen at max. Unfortunately, this cannon is most effective when in down tiers and loses its edge quite quickly in up tiers, making knowledge of weak spots absolutely necessary in those cases. If nothing else, the T14 also features a stabilizer, a good turret traverse rate, and a top-mounted HMG, all of which are very helpful. With all things considered, I'd say that the T14 is still somewhat average to maybe slightly above average in terms of armament. Now for mobility, I give this a 4.5 out of 10. The speed on this vehicle isn't really all that bad, especially considering that it is essentially a heavy tank. While it sports a mediocre 11.7 horsepower per ton power to weight ratio, it moves around better than one might expect. It certainly won't win any races and is likely to be on the slower side of tanks in any given match, but the T14 is still sufficiently quick to get where you'll need to be in a match, whether it's to the front line, a hotspot, or even the occasional flank, though those are of course pretty rare with this vehicle. Now for survivability, I give this a 7.75 out of 10. This is where the T14 shines. While some vehicles will just pen and destroy the T14, such as the Panther, you typically won't encounter those vehicles all too often. Mostly things like KV-1s, T-34s, and other Sherman variants will be who you end up fighting, and the armor on the T14 is typically more than sufficient to shrug those enemies off, which will allow you time to fire back at them. The front of this vehicle has especially good armor, though the turret and hull sides are also very well protected, relatively speaking. Another thing to note is that the T14 has smoke grenades, which help tremendously in terms of survival. While the whole MG weak spot is very noticeable, and higher BR tanks can still pen the T14 with relative ease, this vehicle still has excellent survivability, especially in a down tier. Now overall, I give this a 6.5 out of 10. If the armament and speed were both marginally better, I'd be giving the T14 a 6.75 or even a 7 out of 10. The T14 is one of those vehicles whose performance far exceeds its stats, especially when combined with a knowledgeable player that can maximize the effectiveness of its cannon and armor via knowledge of enemy weak spots and of course angling. While anyone can do pretty decently with the T14, skilled players will be able to truly unlock its potential. Regardless, as a tank alone, this is still a great vehicle, though I selfishly wish it was still 4.3 BR. Though of course at that point it was also only rank 2, so it's kind of a wash. Now with that said, do I recommend the T14? Well, if you haven't guessed by now, yes, I do. I love this vehicle in all of its shell-bouncing glory. While it doesn't have great overall firepower, it is somewhat amplified by a good reload rate and access to APCR when needed. It can bounce shells to the extent that you have a better chance of being able to fire a follow-up shot while using this vehicle than you would with pretty much any other vehicle in War Thunder, and that opportunity is invaluable. It isn't fast, but it also isn't particularly slow, which makes the T14 well-rounded in more ways than just its armor. For all of these reasons, I give the T14 both my full recommendation and my Tankenstein seal of approval. At only 1,750 Golden Eagles, the T14 represents one of the better deals at this BR. If it increases to 5.0 BR, then not so much. But unless that nightmare ever happens, I will continue to love the T14. Now with that said, thank you all so much for watching. Please let me know what you guys think about this video in the comments below, especially also what you think about the T14. Also, if you don't mind, please consider both liking and subscribing, as doing so will help you to see my videos in the future. But either way, thank you again, and I'll see you all on the other side. Take care, everyone.